Good afternoon. Welcome to Lunch Break Live with Tea Party Patriots. I'm Jenny Beth Martin with Tea Party Patriots Action. This week is Thanksgiving, and I just want to thank you so much for your support of Tea Party Patriots Action. You have been committed to making sure we secure our elections and restore faith in the outcome of our elections for the last 4 years. And because of you, we are making headway doing that. So thank you. I appreciate that so much. You did not give up in 2020. You did not give up in 2021 or in 2022 or in 2023 or in 2024. And because of that, people have much more faith in the outcome of the elections now than they did in 2020. To be sure, there's still much more work to be done, and we cannot stop. Liberty requires eternal vigilance, and you know that better than anyone. You're not going to stop and you won't give up. So thank you very much, and we will continue to work to secure elections and continue to make sure that people have faith in the outcome of elections going into the future. Thank you also for everything that you have done to talk to your friends and neighbors about why you care so much about this country and want what's best for her. Thank you for talking about the reason we want to put America and Americans first and why that is so important. Thank you for letting people know that there was and is a better opportunity for the future, and that because America was on the wrong track, we have the opportunity to make a difference and to convince people that you wanted to make sure Donald Trump was back in the White House and that would help get the country back on the right track. Thank you for wanting to secure the border and always working to do so. Because of you, we do have a brighter future. Donald Trump is going to be in the White House again in January. I can hardly wait, and I know you can't either. And I am so thankful that Americans across this country voted for him. And I am thankful that you, through the work of our Super PAC Tea Party Patriots Citizens Fund and all the other work that you do locally and at a state level on elections, have made a difference. Trump will be back in the White House. Republicans will control the House of Representatives and the Senate. So thank you very, very much for that. This week, as we look at our call to action, I want to encourage you to go to teapartypatriots.org and check out our new survey. It's another thing we can be thankful for. Almost 71% of Americans like the idea of the Department of Government Efficiency, want the Department of Government Efficiency to look for ways to streamline the government, to make it more efficient, and to tell Congress how it needs to go about making changes into law so that we can have a more efficient government. That is amazing, and it is such good news to me, and I know it is to you. You see, having a more efficient government, having a government that is working towards a debt-free future, that's what we've been standing for the last 15 years with this Tea Party movement. And the Tea Party movement evolved into the Trump movement and the Make America Great Again movement. And the fact that now Trump is going to be in the White House and Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy want to work on DOGE and to make the government more efficient, I bet it's music to your ears. It's music to mine. And the great thing about the poll that we did shows that Americans like this idea and want it to happen. So check it out, read through the questions that we asked, see that the majority of Americans agree with us and our ideas. That is something to be thankful for. Then scroll on down to the bottom of the page and sign up for our action items that we will have in the coming weeks and months so that we can support the efforts of DOGE. It's going to be very important. You know as well as I do that the media won't stop, the left won't stop, and they are going to do everything that they can to resist making the government more efficient, to resist getting rid of Wade and fraud and abuse in the government, to resist looking at how we can streamline what the federal government does and return power to states and local governments. And they are going to need our support. So make sure that you are signing up so that we can help support them, and so that the ideas that they are talking about right now don't just stay ideas, they actually turn into action that makes the government better. And makes America better, not the government, but makes America better. So sign up today by going and checking out our poll and then scrolling down and signing up. Now we're going to go to Bill Pasco for our Washington report.
Thank you, Jenny Beth. The House will return on Tuesday, December 3rd and stay in session through Friday. The Senate is scheduled to return Monday, December 2nd, and is also scheduled to stay in session through Friday. This week in the House is in recess. This week in the Senate is in recess. Let's talk about the congressional agenda. When the House and Senate return after the Thanksgiving recess, there will be 3 weeks, that's 12 legislative days, before the current continuing resolution expires. No one has yet moved a muscle to craft a spending bill, either another continuing resolution or an omnibus, to ensure that government funding does not come to a stop on Saturday, December 21. Last we heard, Speaker Johnson had made clear his preference for a short-term continuing resolution to extend government funding at basically its current levels on all programs until March 30, so that the next Congress will have the job in its first several weeks of putting together funding bills to fund the government for the rest of the fiscal year through the end of September. Neither Senate Majority Leader Schumer nor the chairwomen of the Senate and the House Appropriations Committees has been heard to speak on the issue. In addition to figuring out how they're going to keep the government funded beyond December 20, the House and Senate still will have to reconcile the two chambers' competing versions of the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. That's the defense policy bill that's passed every year for more than 6 decades now. The House's version sticks to the spending caps set in the 2023 debt limit deal, which authorizes $883.7 billion. The Senate Armed Services Committee doesn't think that's enough and tacked on another $25 billion. Rather than go to a formal conference committee, Senate leaders filed a manager's amendment in September with 93 amendments already agreed to by leaders in both houses. The idea is to add those amendments to the Senate bill, then pass the Senate bill and send it over to the House. On another front, the Congress is supposed to reauthorize the Farm Bill every 5 years. The last time it came up for reauthorization was 2023, but the Congress couldn't get around to it. So leaders in both chambers agreed to a 1-year extension, meaning that the Farm Bill extension is about to expire. It still doesn't look like they'll have time to get it done before the end of this Congress, so look for another extension to be filed sometime in the next 3 weeks. And one final note on possible action in the lame duck session. The Fiscal Responsibility Act that was enacted in June 2023 suspended the debt limit until January 2, 2025, at which time it will be reinstated at an amount that equals the outstanding debt at that time. Funny how that works, isn't it? Congress must decide if additional action related to the debt limit is needed in December. It's possible the outgoing lame duck Congress will act, but I wouldn't bet on it. Now the latest on lawfare against President Trump. On Friday morning, New York Judge Juan Merchan announced that he was adjourning the sentencing in President Trump's case. He did not issue a new sentencing date or make any further statements about it. District Attorney Alvin Bragg, who won 34 felony convictions against Trump, believes the judge should simply put the sentencing on hold until after Trump finishes his second term as president on January 20, 2029. Stay tuned. Now let's talk about the Department of Government Efficiency. President Trump's outside-the-box Department of Government Efficiency, also known as the DOGE, hasn't even been officially established, but it's already off to a strong start. Last Wednesday, co-leaders Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy published a piece in the Wall Street Journal laying out their vision for significant changes. And later that same day, we received evidence of strong public support for their effort in the form of survey results showing that large majorities of the American public support the creation of the department and also support them using one of the tools they plan to use to achieve efficiency. That is, the termination of federal employees who fail to return to the office. The survey was conducted 2 days after Election Day for Tea Party Patriots Action by pollster John McLaughlin, who also polls for President Trump. With a survey sample of 1,000 general election voters, the survey had a margin of error of plus or minus 3.1% at the 95% confidence interval. Confident that Trump would win and be in position to implement his second-term agenda, we wanted to ask two simple questions that no one, to our knowledge, had yet asked. First, is there public support for the creation of a Department of Government Efficiency? And second, does the public support a proposal to require government employees to go back to their offices to work or fire them if they refuse to do so? The survey results are conclusive. By strong margins, voters support both. Asked, do you support or oppose a Department of Government Efficiency whose sole purpose is to audit the government for inefficiencies and to instruct Congress on adjusting the federal budget to reduce costs and eliminate redundancy, unnecessary programs, and unnecessary services? 71% say they support the idea, with 40% saying they strongly support it and 31% saying they somewhat support it, against just 10% who say they somewhat oppose it and 6% who say they strongly oppose it. Support for the establishment of the DOGE is bipartisan, too. 79% of Republicans support it, 68% of independents support it, and even 64% of Democrats support it. Not surprisingly, Trump voters support it most strongly of all. Fully 79%, 4 out of 5, support the creation of the DOGE. Supporting the creation of the new department and its effort to shrink the size and scope of government is one thing. But what about the tactics its leaders will use to achieve its ends? After all, it's one thing to speak in the abstract about shrinking government. It's another thing to get down to the details. Does the public actually support firing government workers if they won't do the simple act of coming back to work in their offices? Yes, it turns out, the public supports that too. We wanted to make sure survey respondents understood the full context of the question. So, to our pollsters' delight, we asked a medium-length question with a very long introduction. Quote, we are now more than 4 years from the height of the COVID pandemic, and America's largest companies, including Apple, Google, and Starbucks, have insisted their employees return to the office to work. Small companies like local gas stations and restaurants also have employees working in person. 2.87 million civilians work in the federal government, yet 50% of those employees have yet to return to the office. These federal employees decide how tax dollars are spent and how government programs are implemented, and they are supposed to ensure those programs run efficiently. Yet, with no in-person office presence, the employees lack accountability. Do you support or oppose a proposal to force government employees back to their offices or fire them if they refuse to do so? End quote. Fully 65% of those surveyed say they support the firing of government workers who will not come back to work. 37% say they strongly support it. 29% say they somewhat support it, against just 12% who somewhat oppose it, and 12% who strongly oppose it. Not surprisingly, 76% of Republicans and 65% of independents support it. Even Democrats, a solid majority, 55%, support it. This is crucial to the success of the exercise. As Musk and Ramaswamy wrote in their Wall Street Journal opinion piece, quote, if federal employees don't want to show up, American taxpayers shouldn't pay them for the COVID-era privilege of staying home, end quote. They're right, of course. It's just that simple, and the public agrees. And as they pointed out, the new work condition, actually, prior to COVID, a work condition none of us even would have thought of as a condition, because we all would have naturally assumed that government workers would work in their offices as a matter of course, could result in a form of self-selection for reductions in force, a, quote, wave of voluntary terminations that we welcome, as they put it. Two other things of note happened on the DOGE front last week. First, the House Oversight and Government Accountability Committee, under Chairman James Comer, announced the creation of a new subcommittee for the 119th Congress. Not coincidentally, It will be called the Delivering on Government Efficiency Committee, with the not surprising acronym DOGE. To chair this new subcommittee, Comer and Speaker Mike Johnson selected Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. In the announcement statement, Greene said she would work to, quote, identify and investigate the waste, corruption, and absolutely useless parts of our federal government, end quote. Marjorie Taylor Greene's moment has arrived. She now has a committee gavel. She can call hearings, examine witnesses, and issue reports. I, for one, look forward to her calling agency heads and walking them through their budgets, line by line, asking them to explain each individual expense to the taxpayers. It's not going to take long for the DOGE support numbers I just mentioned to skyrocket. The second other thing of note that happened on the DOGE front is a personnel choice that we'll get to momentarily. In fact, let's move right now to the latest on Trump personnel moves. The Trump-Vance transition team announced last Monday that former Wisconsin Republican Congressman Sean Duffy would be nominated to serve as Secretary of Transportation. On Tuesday, the transition team announced that Howard Lutnick, the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, the Wall Street firm, who's been co-chairing the transition team along with former SBA Administrator Linda McMahon, would be nominated to serve as Secretary of Commerce. Later on Tuesday afternoon, the team announced that Dr. Mehmet Oz would be tapped to serve as administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And then the team announced that Linda McMahon, former SBA administrator and co-chair of the transition team, would be nominated to serve as Secretary of Education. On Wednesday, the team announced that former Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker would be nominated to serve as the United States Ambassador to NATO. The team followed that up with the announcement that former Michigan Congressman and U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra would be nominated to serve as United States Ambassador to Canada. On Thursday, just before 1 p.m. Eastern Time, the Trump-Vance transition team sent out a press release noting President Trump's post to his social media account, noting that former Congressman Matt Gaetz had decided to withdraw his nomination to serve as Attorney General. We'll talk more about that in a moment. At 7 p.m. that same night, the transition team announced that Trump would nominate former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi to serve as Attorney General. And within less than one news cycle, the question of who would replace Gaetz as the nominee for AG was settled. Friday was quiet until Friday evening, when the transition team let loose a torrent of statements regarding nominees. In the space of 1 hour and 8 minutes, the transition team announced that Scott Bessent would serve as Secretary of the Treasury. Russ Vought would serve as Director of the Office of Management and Budget, reprising a role in which he excelled in the first Trump administration, and which is the second other thing of note that happened on the DOGE front last week. With Russ at OMB again, DOGE is going to get some serious assistance from inside the White House from a key senior aide with experience and connections. The transition team also announced in the space of that 1 hour and 8 minutes that Oregon Congresswoman Lori Chavez DeRemer would serve as Secretary of Labor, a nomination about which we will speak more in a moment. Dr. Jeanette Nishawat would serve as the nation's Surgeon General. Former Florida Congressman Dave Weldon would serve as Director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Dr. Marty McCary would serve as Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, and former NFL player Scott Turner would serve as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. On Saturday, the transition team announced that Brooke Rollins, who served as Director of the Domestic Policy Council in the first Trump administration and did an excellent job there, would serve as Secretary of Agriculture in the second Trump administration. Now to Matt Gaetz. Because I'm a stickler for accuracy in this weekly summary of the news I provide for you, let's get something straight. Matt Gaetz was never nominated for Attorney General by Donald Trump. That's because none of the people whose nominations we've been discussing, and those who have been announced by the Trump-Vance transition team, Gaetz included, have actually been nominated yet. That is, none of them have actually been nominated yet because Trump has not been sworn in yet, which means he has no power to nominate anybody. All Trump has at this point is the power to promise to nominate someone at a point in the future, sometime after January 20 of next year, when he will take the oath of office for the second time. History will record that Trump announced his intent to nominate Gaetz, and 8 days later, less than one Scaramucci, for those who have been following the ins and outs of senior Trump aides and Trump cabinet officers for some time now, Gaetz said he wanted no more of it. Gaetz sat for several days with Vice President-elect J.D. Vance and met with various GOP senators. Normally, the protocol would be for Gaetz to walk to the various members' offices and have one-on-ones with the senators, courtesy calls, in the senators' offices. This time, though, he had the Vice President-elect acting as his personal tour guide through the clubby world of the U.S. Senate, and for what I can only assume were security reasons, since the Vice President-elect was with him, Vance and Gaetz sat in a room and had the senators come to them one at a time for their conversations. After a few days of this, Trump and Gaetz had had enough. Enough Republican senators had told both of them directly that confirming Gaetz would be a very heavy lift and would require the expenditure of an awful lot of Trump's political capital at a time when Trump had better uses for that political capital. So Gaetz gracefully announced his withdrawal, announced the following day on Charlie Kirk's podcast that he would not be sworn into the 119th Congress in January, even though he was elected to serve in it just 3 weeks ago, and then created an account on Cameo, where you can now pay him $500 to record and send a birthday greeting to a friend of yours, or maybe an enemy if you want. Now to Pete Hegseth. In last week's episode, I mistakenly said Pete Hegseth, Trump's choice to serve as Secretary of Defense, had settled a lawsuit brought by a woman who accused him of sexual assault by paying her off. That was wrong. There was no lawsuit. He bought her silence by paying her off before she ever filed a lawsuit against him. The woman had told local police that he had sexually assaulted her after he appeared as the speaker at an event for the California Federation of Republican Women in October 2017. The police investigated the situation, talked to witnesses, talked to Hegseth, looked at security camera video, and local authorities concluded that no charges were warranted. That does not mean nothing happened. That means that they decided it would be difficult to obtain a conviction if they moved forward with a prosecution. The fact that Hegseth decided to pay her off also does not mean something did happen. It simply means he was concerned that the simple filing of a lawsuit against him on those grounds might have cost him his employment at Fox News, where he was a host on the weekends. Famous people get lawsuits filed against them often, and they are often settled or avoided outright by an agreement to pay someone money in exchange for silence. Such non-disclosure agreements are commonplace, especially in various branches of the entertainment industry. So it would be no more accurate to impute Hegseth's guilt from the fact that he agreed to buy the woman's silence than it would be to impute his innocence from the fact that the police did not file charges against him. But, and this is the key here, the Trump-Vance transition team was not made aware of this episode before Trump made the decision to announce that Hegseth was Trump's choice to serve as Secretary of Defense. I've come across no reporting on Trump's reaction to the news of this development, and I have no insight on what the transition team thinks other than the statements they've released, all of which show continued support for Hegseth's official nomination to come. Now that Gaetz is no longer going to attract much attention from the press, I expect it will be Hegseth's turn to serve as the media's target. Now let's talk about Lori Chavez DeRemer. As mentioned a moment ago, Oregon Congresswoman Lori Chavez DeRemer emerged late last week as President Trump's choice to serve as Secretary of Labor. Keep your eye on this one. This nomination could end up becoming quite controversial, not because Republican senators will object to her on personal grounds, but because some might object to her on policy grounds. Why? Because Lori Chavez DeRemer supports the big labor agenda right down the line. In a House with a slim Republican majority, she was one of only 3 Republicans to co-sponsor the PRO Act. That's the big labor grab bag wish list bill that would strike down state-level right-to-work laws in the 26 states where unions cannot force workers to join them as a condition of employment, among other things. Within moments of the nomination, it was hailed by Teamsters President Sean O'Brien and, get this, American Federation of Teachers head Randy Weingarten. O'Brien, of course, spoke at the Republican National Convention, and the Trump-Vance campaign tried hard to win his endorsement. When he polled his members, 62% of them said they were going to vote for Trump. In spite of that, O'Brien refused to give Trump the Teamsters endorsement. And the teachers' union? Please. They wouldn't have endorsed Trump if they'd been threatened with losing tenure. But in giving the labor nod to their close ally, DeRemer, Trump is acting as if the unions deserve a political payoff. Now, some people are saying we have to think more broadly about the GOP. We have to think about expanding the base of the party the way Reagan did. Reagan won lots of union support and did expand the party. That's true. But Reagan did it by winning the votes of the members of the unions, not by courting the leadership. He went after the members, not the leaders. He won the endorsement of the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization, PATCO, in the 1980 election. And then when they struck in early 1981, he fired them. He didn't just send a message to big labor with that decision. He sent a message to Moscow and Tehran that there was a new sheriff in town. Trump, on the other hand, failed to win the union's endorsement, but then gave them the most pro-big labor Secretary of Labor he could have. It's backwards, and it's confounding some key Republican senators. One of those Republican senators who's going to be key to the success of this nomination is Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, who, it happens, will assume the chairmanship of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, also known as the HELP Committee. That's the committee with jurisdiction over the nomination. Upon learning of her nomination, Cassidy tweeted, quote, "I look forward to speaking with Chavez DeRemer about her vision for DOL. I will need to get a better understanding of her support for Democrat legislation in Congress that would strip Louisiana's ability to be a right-to-work state, and if that will be her position going forward," end quote. So, we're going to keep our eye on that nomination. Now, finally, to the Jenny Beth Show. Episode 100 of the Jenny Beth Show dropped on Wednesday of last week. The episode features Jenny Beth's discussion with Bill Norton of Bellevue University. The two have a very interesting conversation about Bill's innovative classroom simulations on civics education, using classic texts from the Magna Carta to the Constitution. As always, it's a very interesting discussion. Highly recommended. And that's our Washington Report for this week.
Bill, thank you so much for that Washington Report. And thank you and Landon and Kevin and Megan for making sure that the Lunch Break Live with Tea Party Patriots happens every single week and that we have great reports from Washington. Thank you all so much for making this possible. And thanks to all of our supporters. I appreciate every single one of you. I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving with your families. And I hope that when you sit down at your Thanksgiving meal, you give thanks for the future that we have in America today. And remember that it's because of you, because of the sacrifices you and your family make, and because of the people just like you all across this country that we have a brighter future. Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.